Welcome to the Your Audio Solutions podcast, episode 6. Today we have the awesome producer Rayan Bailouni, who is based in Dubai currently, where he's changing the music industry. And this is a really cool conversation because Ryan's work in Dubai is really inspiring, and he's working hard to change the landscape of music in Dubai. So it's a really cool conversation. And I think you're gonna love it. We actually talk about his beginnings studying commercial and industrial biotechnology in Newcastle, which is quite different from being a producer in Dubai. But you hear all about it. We also talk about the challenges he encountered in his first years and how he convinced artists to work with him in Dubai, how Dubai's music scene industry is changing and Ryan's involvement in that, and also Ryan's goal of breaking the cultural stigma that has been surrounding Dubai and the UAE. Also about the positive change the music industry is seeing in Dubai because the government is opening up to more technologies and platforms such as Spotify. But we also talk about the lack of venues that exist in Dubai and how this affects musicians and the music community in Dubai and himself as a producer. Also about the catch-22 that currently exists for artists. I think you really love this conversation. I know I did. But before we jump into the conversation with Ryan, I want to tell you about a free guide you can download right now at youraudiosolutions.com. It's called 3 Tested Ways to Increase Your Client Base. This guide is for people whose technical skills are already up to par and you have already spent your whole life making music, but the only thing that's missing is the clients. If you have a home studio or work in a professional studio and want to increase your client base, or if you live in a small city with not much music happening and your only option to find clients is online, or if you have finished your college degree and are looking to get your foot in the door. In this guide, you can learn how to increase your client base online and in the real world. In this guide, I will show you the email I use to contact bands online and how I have built relationships with people in the music industry. I will also show you the best way of getting repeat customers and how to price yourself. Check this free guide out by using the link below. I think you will love it and find it really useful. But now over to the conversation with Rayan Bailouni. Because we know you're not, well, I know you're not from Dubai originally.
Yes,
So could you tell us, where you grew up? Let's start there. Where did you
sure.
grow up?
Sure. So my father's from Syria and my mother's from the UK, up in Newcastle. And I was born in Newcastle in South Shields and moved to Abu Dhabi when I was 3 or 4 months old, and spent pretty much from when I was 3 months old all the way up until 18 living in Abu Dhabi. I did primary school there, secondary school or high school there as well. And it was only until I was 18 that I left Abu Dhabi to go study in the UK, in Newcastle University, to do my bachelor's and both my master's in commercial and industrial biotechnology. So most of my upbringing, even though I'm not from the UAE, was in Abu Dhabi, and that's where my parents moved when I was barely months old.
Right. And did your parents move with you to the UK? Was it Scotland, you said?
My parents didn't move with me to the UK. So when I graduated from high school, I moved to the UK alone, and some of my family members followed me there a few years later. But when I finished my last master's degree, my family had relocated to Doha, Qatar, and that's when I moved to Doha to work a job in pharmaceutical, and I moved back to Dubai after quitting that job. So we never really all moved together at the same point. We've all since then just been, one of us here, one of us there. Yeah.
But so have you always done music since you were a kid, or when did you start paying attention to
Yeah.
music?
So I think I always had music classes as a kid, doing like recorder and flute and stuff like that. But I really only started taking music seriously when I was about 14 years old. I started playing the guitar, getting into a little bit of soft rock music and stuff like that. And then obviously when you're in high school and you play guitar, the pretty much the only thing that you want to do is be in a band. So that's when I started meeting other people in high school that loved music or played an instrument, and started getting into a band, and then started making my own band. And then obviously that happened a couple more times up until I was about 23, 24. But that's how I got into music. I picked up the guitar and started meddling around on bass guitar, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, and then just kept developing my love for guitar. Before I started learning how to do it.
Yeah, sure. Did you have to convince your parents to buy you a guitar, or was it a straightforward thing?
Yeah, yeah, it was a strange one because the first guitar I ever got actually was it wasn't even really mine. Someone had left it at the house, and I decided to just pick it up and try it. And my parents, I think, at the time, thought that it was maybe just like a pastime, or it was just something like secondary to like video games or something at the time. But it was only really when I started learning that you could I could use it as a tool for creating emotions and feelings, and creating things that or even emulating things I heard on the radio and on CDs and tapes and cassettes. And then I think after that, when you start playing an instrument, you always start with a very standard entry level level of instrument build. And then as I started getting better and better at guitar, I wanted to buy a more expensive guitar and a more expensive guitar. And then I think that's where the difficulty came with my parents, is because that's when, I wanted more, investment of money into my craft. And then that's when it became maybe a bit tougher for them to follow, because I continuously became more and more addicted to gear and pedals and guitars and drums and bass. And then that's what eventually that's what eventually got me into wanting to be a band, be in my own band, and then also recording.
Yeah. So was this also the time when you started experimenting with recording, or was that maybe a few years on playing?
Yeah, the first time I was exposed to recording is when I decided to book my band when I was about 18 years old, into a studio in Abu Dhabi to record our album, because I didn't know any other way of making our own CD. And being in that studio environment, which was a very professional studio at the time, seemed like a different world to me, and I absolutely loved it. I sometimes used to stay extra hours. I would even lock up the studio for the engineer because he was too tired and he wanted to go home, and he trusted me with the keys, so I would lock up the studio for him. And I think that's when I totally fell in love with the recording environment. And when I left to university, I asked my parents, they were asking me, what do you want to do in university? What do you want to study? And I told them, I don't even know if I want to study. I think I want to do an internship and work part-time at the studio and help out and maybe do sound engineering. And my parents didn't really think that was a viable career path. So, especially in the 90s in Abu Dhabi at the time, there wasn't really an industry for music as there is today. So I decided to do, biotechnology, but When I left the UAE to the UK, I actually asked the head engineer at the studio if I could borrow his CD to install Cubase and Fruity Loops, yeah, for free on my laptop. And instead, he gave me Cubase, Fruity Loops, and he gave me Adobe Audition, which at that time was really bad um, compared to what it is now. And then I ended up just learning how to record by myself on my own laptop using Adobe Audition, and that's where I eventually started really getting into recording and editing, and just to continue that phase or stage that I had just got into with that studio.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting, man. So, what did your parents say when you actually decided to move back to set up your studio? Because then you moved back to Dubai, right?
Yes,
From
yeah.
UK,
So
yeah.
yeah, it's a very strange story because uh, it was actually not long after. It was almost about I would say like 9 or 10 months after I quit my job. And the day I quit my job, I didn't even know I was going to quit. It was a very impulsive decision, but I just remember how much better I felt knowing that I didn't have to do that anymore. And I think maybe that was me fighting my instinct or my natural affection for doing music for so long, almost 10 years by that point. Um, and when I told my father that I quit my job, the first thing he asked me was, "What are you going to do instead?" And my answer was like, "I don't know." And in that 10 months, my mother said, if the next step you make has to be the one that you're most sure about. So in the 10 months that I was unemployed, it was actually one of my best friends in the band, who's the guitarist in my band Coat of Arms, and we were working on a new album, and we were thinking of hiring and sending the stems and the project to maybe an engineer or producer in the States to mix and master and edit it. And as I kept doing more and more demos, he said to me, "It's like, man, I don't understand why you just wouldn't do it yourself, since you've written most of this music and you've already made such detailed demos. Why wouldn't you just go all the way, since you don't even have a job anyways? Why don't you put some time into doing that? You clearly love it." And I was a little bit apprehensive, but I decided to do it anyways, since I had nothing else to do, and it was something I probably deep down wanted to do. And then the more and more I got into it, by the time I finished making that album, and it went out and we released it everywhere, a couple of bands from Dubai, while I was still living in Doha, a couple of bands in Dubai reached out to me, and they said, "Man, we just heard your band's album, and it sounds phenomenal. It sounds so good. Where did you get it done?" And I said, "Oh, actually, I did it myself." And they were like, "Oh, that's crazy. We actually were finishing off our album. We would love for you to come down and help us with ours." So in that visit to Dubai, that's when I learned that the information about how you can start a company, how you can set up a company, set up a studio, what the costs were, getting a visa, getting a trade license. And then I came back from that vacation, and I said to my parents, I'm gonna go and open a studio and a music production company in Dubai. And it was so random, because for them, they just thought I was visiting for a couple of days to meet some friends and come back. But when I came back, I had made obviously a very big life decision. And ever since then, it's just been an amazing journey. But it was never anything that I planned to do. I just sort of let life happen rather than anything else.
Yeah, yeah. And how many years ago was that then?
So the album came out in 2015. So it must have been about the end. I would say December 2014 is maybe when I made that initial visit.
Yeah, I just had to look at the map, like how far away, far apart, because I didn't know Doha and Dubai. Um,
Yeah, so they're about a 45-minute flight away from each other, so they're quite close. Yeah, even though they're completely different countries.
yeah, yeah. So, how was the experience when you actually decided to go to Dubai from Doha? Is it really dissimilar, like the two places, or did you know what to
So,
do?
yeah, so Doha doesn't really have a very active. Well, sorry, I mean at the time that I was there in Doha, there wasn't really a music scene that was there, let alone an active one. So most of the time that I was in Doha, I was remotely operating, you know, with the Dubai scene. So when I moved to Dubai, it just meant that I was physically closer, but I wasn't out of reach or out of touch with a lot of people because I had been keeping in touch since I left. But it was very, it was a, it's a very strange decision. It was a very strange decision for my father to accept, because my father, coming from like maybe like a more Arab way of thinking or mentality, he and obviously I don't blame him for that because it's not his field of knowledge. But he didn't understand how someone would make money in that industry, especially in the Middle East, where it's a region not associated to entertainment or media or music like Hollywood or London, or like this is Dubai at that time, So when I made the move over to Dubai, I was obviously very nervous because I didn't even know if I could make it work. I didn't know how many artists there were. I didn't know if there would be even enough artists to record and make a full-time living just doing music, So when I got to Dubai, it was a very segregated scene. A lot of artists sort of knew of each other or heard of each other, but there was no conversation between artists. They weren't talking about each other's music. They weren't sharing each other's music. They were just all doing their own thing. And maybe they heard of you somewhere or they played somewhere and they knew that you did music. It was a very isolated scene. There was little groups and pockets of people that stuck together, and it wasn't a very well connected scene. And since moving to Dubai and being now so blessed to have worked with so many different artists of different genres, and some of them have even been like, they never did music before, I helped produce their album or their single or whatever. Now we've reached a point in Dubai that is completely different to the Dubai I first visited. So now we have a scene that's thriving, that's rising, that's making a bigger and bigger impact by the day on global music, whether it's a small or a big way, but at least in a way, which is amazing considering it's only been like 3 years, But the jump from Doha to Dubai at that time was a strange jump, but even the difference of Dubai then to Dubai now is a big change.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was only what, 4 years ago now, I guess.
Yeah, 3 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago. I mean, by the time I had moved my things and I'd made the move, it's probably around 3 years since then.
Yeah, yeah. And how was the process of you for those first, let's say the first 2 years of you trying to establish yourself and just discovering the scene in Dubai? How did that look for you?
It was tough because it's very. I found it was very challenging to convince someone that it's a decision that they should that music was a decision they should make. Because a lot of artists at that time, or anyone that played music and sang, most likely did it as a hobby, and and they had a full time job. So, to do music full time, if you want to be an artist full time, you know, you would have to give up your day job, or you would have to invest a lot of time into making it work. So in the beginning, it was very hard, because I didn't have a portfolio, with all these different genres that I knew that I could do. So it was very hard convincing people that I could get them, the quality and the work, and I could get the best out of them that I believed that they had. It was also hard because they themselves did not feel that music was a viable career path, or a viable thing to do or to achieve anything with. And that's probably what drove me harder to do it, because it just brought back memories of when my parents told me when I was 18 or 19 that I couldn't do it. And it actually made me want to do it even more, because I was like, if I'm not the one to break this frame of thinking here, then who else would? Because like I pretty much consider myself, so attached to this country because of how long I've lived here. So if I didn't believe that someone could do it here, that sort of reflects on myself as well. So I thought, no, I'm going to change this, and I'm gonna make people realize that you can do something with music from here. And that was probably the first 2 years, was probably establishing and building a big portfolio, where I was responsible for a majority of the sound coming through the city, to where I am now. And probably the other half was not just building a portfolio, but changing the mindset of the community, the music community here.
How did that process look then, like for you to change their minds? What did you do to do that?
Um, I gave people hope, and I wanted to break the stigma, that that Dubai music had. One of the things I remember I used to say a lot was, there seems to be a huge disconnect between the way Dubai perceives itself and perceives the rest of the world, and the way the rest of the world perceives Dubai. And at that time, when I had moved, we would have concerts where people like The Weeknd, Drake, Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, whoever, you could name the biggest artists in the world, they had Rihanna, they had played Dubai. And I would tell artists, and I would tell people getting into music, I said, do you know that I'm pretty sure that if you spoke to any one of those artists that are, worldwide, some of the biggest artists in the world, and you're in the room when they get told that they're about to play a show in Dubai, I bet you their reaction is, oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm playing Dubai. That's crazy. I can't wait. And there's like this feeling of them feeling blessed to visit this part of the world and actually be able to visit Dubai and play here. However, the flip of that, I would tell them, when you tell someone in Dubai that Drake or Rihanna or whatever are coming to play Dubai, we feel so lucky and blessed to have them, as if we're some small town, in the middle of nowhere that nobody knows about, and they finally heard about us. And it still felt like the mentality of the people in the city was like a small town, like a small middle of nowhere. And it's Dubai, we're not. So why is there such a big disconnect, between the way we perceive ourselves and the way they perceive us? And I wanted to bridge that. And I told them, I said, the only way to bridge that is if you believe that you're in a place a lot bigger than you think. And by the time if we make an album together, or we write a song, or we produce something, maybe the next time some of those artists come here, or some of those big companies are looking for someone here, they'll realize that there's music that's globally acceptable and that's high quality music, even from here. But if we don't make the music now, and show the world that we can we can actually make music here that's as good as anywhere else, we'll always continue to have that mentality. It was a, it was, it's a very, it's a, it's a thing of grandeur, but I really, I said it then, I believed it then, and I still believe it now. And I feel that the more and more that, we do what we do here, and, I keep pushing for what I believe in, the closer I feel we're getting to that, even though it's such a short space of time.
Yeah. So you have definitely seen a positive change in the music community in
100%.
Dubai.
We're 100%. We're at a point now where we have. I mean, 3 years ago we didn't even have Spotify. 3 months ago we didn't even have Spotify. Yeah. So we're reaching. I mean, at that time we barely had any streaming platforms. Now we've reached a point where we have artists on streaming platforms with 100 to 200,000 monthly listens, and
That are local to Dubai, you mean?
yeah, yeah. That we have local artists that are collaborating with artists from all around the world, from America, from London, from Paris, from Philippines. We have we have artists that are opening for huge acts, international acts now that are coming here. So we're finally bridging the gap, in such a way that it's very clear that there's a positive impact. There's a positive change, being made, It's just a process that takes time, because if you want to develop any music culture or a sense of culture in music, especially in a city, the way, Sweden has a sound, Canada has a sound, LA has a sound, Miami has a sound, New York, etc., London, Dubai will eventually find its sound, but it needs to be given time, perseverance and determination. And I feel like we're in the first phase of that.
Yeah, but do you also think the government choosing to open up more technology is going to help that process?
Yeah, I feel that the more and more technology that we open up to, the better. I also feel that Dubai is a very transient city, and it's the heart of the Middle East in terms of traffic and travel. A lot of people come through Dubai on transit, and I feel like Dubai is exposed to so many different nationalities and people that eventually with maybe a bit more funding or exposure or more platforms for development, the quicker we will move into a second phase. And I feel that we're sort of in a transition period now between a phase 1 and phase 2, where now there are a lot more there's a lot more national recognition for these things.
Yeah, that's very cool, man. But how is it in terms of venues that supports music? Do you have a lot of that too, or is that also?
Yeah, so this is one of the biggest issues that I think we still face. Is everyone knows that the bread and butter of any artist or musician or band in the world is going to come from sales of their music, sales of their merchandise, and playing live shows. And the problem that we have still in Dubai, and really regionally as well across the Gulf and the Middle East, there are no dedicated venues that are purely for playing music. There is no spot that there will be a music concert 3-4 times a week where you can go and watch live music, the same way you would have a cinema or a theater. We don't have venues that can facilitate all of this music being created for artists to then connect with their audience, face to face. And I think because we don't have these smaller, more active venues, we only have the big theaters, we only have the big arenas, and that only really works for big festivals once or twice a year. But for the bread and butter, where you need to be playing shows regularly or consistently, or have other artists that want to maybe do a tour and include Dubai on their list of tours of the region, we don't have those venues, and it makes music discovery even makes it, weaker than it should be. And I think that's something that we really need to change.
But how does that affect your work as a producer? Because it must be hard for you to go out and scout bands, so to speak.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to scout bands, but I think where the biggest problem is that it actually demotivates returning artists. Because if an artist makes a song and an artist then puts it out on all streaming platforms and they try to promote it and they get it playlisted, at some point or another they want to play that song live and they want to connect with people they know and people they don't know, through shows and gigs and events. And when those shows and gigs are so hard to come by because they're so sporadic and they're not consistent, it cuts off the monetary supply and for an artist, which means that it becomes a lot harder for them in terms of like a return of investment, or for them to continue making some sort of income from money to continue wanting to do it and build their artistry and their portfolio and their music more, which makes it harder for them to come back to the studio because it's demotivating, and it's also it removes the reward of their earlier hard work. So a lot of them then it becomes harder for them to persevere and to continue doing music, because if we only got Spotify 3 months ago and there are no venues, then really the only way you can make money is if you sell merch, but you can't sell merch if you're not playing a show. So it almost it's kind of like a vicious circle. It feeds into a vicious circle for artists where they get stuck in this like in the Matrix, like the train station, the in between, where they're not really sure whether to come or go.
Yeah. That makes sense. But so how? Because you do, like you said, you have big artists coming. You even have a huge jazz festival, right? Do you think that is inspiring the younger audience, or is it still the same?
I think there are a couple of events. There's a couple of events. There's the jazz festival is one of our bigger events. There's also Soul DXB. There's also Wasla Festival. There's a few, and I think all of them have their demographic that they appeal to, and I think the demographic that go to those events are very much inspired to want to play or attend that event the next year. But like I said, these are just annual events. It's very hard to keep motivated for the other 364 days because of that one day a year that you go to that festival where they play the music you like. Where in most other countries, these festivals where these festivals represent a round off of all of the music happening that year. It represents sort of like, the oasis in the middle of the desert of like, we've had almost nothing the whole year and now we finally have the one big one, so it does incentivize, but it's very hard for that one day to motivate for the other 364.
Yeah. No, I get it, man. That's tricky. In our previous conversation, you also mentioned something interesting about, because the lack of venues to play in, it's obviously hard to get recognized in Dubai or in that community, and that you first need to get recognized internationally first.
Yes.
So it almost feels like a catch-22 to me, looking from the outside, because how can you get recognized internationally if you can't get recognized locally first, but you can't get locally recognized, so it creates a funny situation, I guess, right?
100%. The problem is that the catch-22 that you've explained is such a huge issue for almost every artist here, because of, like you said, all of the constraints that we have in terms of a lack of venues where there's consistent live music, um, for because of the difficulty of being discoverable and reachable, whether that's because of Spotify not being here and other streaming platforms maybe not capturing all of the local music, whatever it is. For all of those reasons that we said, artists feel that the only way they're going to get recognized locally is if they get international recognition first. So that almost feels like someone saying the only way I'm going to learn how to only way I'm going to learn how to walk is if I run first, which seems so counterintuitive. Where the path seems to be inwards rather than outwards. Normally in any other scene, you become a very popular figure or artist in your local scene, and you have such a great support that the people that support you from where you're from then push you on to represent them in other countries and other regions. Where in this situation, we have artists coming to us locally, saying, well, they know about me in America, and they know about me in the UK, and they know about me in Canada, and they know about me here and there. So, shame on you for not knowing me here. And it almost, it creates a very weird tension, whether it's between artist to artist relationships, whether it's between event organizers to artist relationships. Because, I mean, can you imagine speaking to a local artist who's had huge success internationally, but can't even fill a show with 100 people locally? Like, it's very strange. It's a very strange dynamic, and it can cause friction and tension, but it can also cause confusion. So it is a catch-22, and I feel that I don't feel the issue can be solved on one side or the other. It has to come from both. It has to come from local awareness and more local initiatives, driven to put our artists from this region on the map, and also from the rest of the world to recognize and appreciate the difficulties of what we go through here.
Yeah, for sure. But because I mean, obviously, you're really passionate about changing the view of music, in Dubai, for example. Do you have any, or could you see yourself taking some initiatives and trying to set up something like a night in some venue, for example?
Yeah, so this is something that that has come to the forefront of my mind more and more and more the longer I've been doing this, especially within the last 12 months. And obviously with all of the music that I'm involved with, you eventually reach a point where you think the only way that I'm going to make a change is if I do it myself. And you get a very strong sense of like a DIY community where people go like, we'll just do it ourselves, because you can't wait around for it, because in the time that you're waiting, you maybe run out of momentum or money or, opportunities. So it is something that I'm looking to do in the near future. There are some things that I have planned that I can't really divulge or talk about too much yet, but there are a lot of initiatives that I'm planning to be a part of within the next 6 to 12 months, where I can actually start to make that possible, like I did developing so many artists earlier. I really feel like that's my next phase of interest, to be able to make the change and the changes that I want.
Yeah, yeah. Nice, man. Um, so how, or the artists or bands you work with in Dubai, do you get a lot of questions from them about the industry, or do you get to mentor them, some of them, like to encourage them and stuff?
Yeah, so a lot of the artists they do ask me about a lot about the industry, and they ask me about my advice or my my point of view about what they should do next and how they should make their next move, which I find very flattering, and it's very humbling, because I know that they're asking these questions because I'm probably more involved and I deal with these sorts of things a lot more day to day than maybe they do. So they ask because there aren't too many other people to ask, and that role, that mentorship role is really, it differs between every artist. Maybe with some artists they have a good sense of strategy and a release plan, and they have things going on for them, and the mentorship is more maybe with the development of sound and artistic expression. And then maybe with others it's more about learning how to be a bit more business savvy, or a bit more savvy in terms of getting shows and gigs and how to promote their music. So there isn't, I don't really have the same type of role with different artists, but with every different artist. But definitely in some way or another, I do feel the responsibility of helping every single one of them in a different way, so that they all have an even chance of getting to where I feel they should be.
Yeah. Nice, man. So I mean, I don't really know how the school system work in Dubai, for example. But do you think
Hmm.
getting music into education? I mean, first of all, do you have a music education there?
So we have a lot of schools that provide music education. However, it's not an obligatory
Course.
curriculum,
Oh yeah,
part
sure.
of the
Yeah.
curriculum. Sorry.
Yeah.
So it's more or less whether that school and what system they follow chooses to do that, and it's not always implemented entirely from start to finish in school. There are some schools that have it between certain grades, and there are some schools that have it as an optional choice. So I think implementing more musical programs into schools would definitely help. But I think it would increase the number of grassroots level artists. But I think it would populate that part of the ecosystem so much, maybe that if the other end of the spectrum doesn't build up as well, where we don't have these venues and shows and opportunities to fuel those new artists coming through, you're going to end up having a very small pond with too many fish that
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
grow.
Yeah.
You know.
Makes sense. Yeah, of course. Um, I mean, because I mean, this problem is not only it's in many countries like U.S. cutting a lot of music programs, and UK. I'm not too sure, but growing up in Sweden, we always had music as in the curriculum. There was after school
Absolutely.
programs. Without that, there wouldn't be a Max Martin, for example. And I
Absolutely.
wouldn't.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, it's super important.
Absolutely. And also, I think one of the things that really hit me the hardest in the last couple of years is when I heard the age of entry into music professionally in the UAE compared to a lot of other countries. I think in other countries like the US and Europe, the age to entry for professional music is between the ages of 17 to 20. Whereas in the Gulf, or especially in Dubai, the age of entry is 24 to 26. So that is a huge difference of age if that's the average. You know what I mean? I feel that if there was more musical programs implemented at school, I feel it would maybe reduce the age of entry into music, because people would be, the knowledge of music would be a lot higher at a younger age for you to feel more encouraged to follow your ambition. But I think that also maybe suggests that maybe that would affect the quality of music, and I feel the quality of music here is equal to maybe anywhere else in the world. However, I just feel the one part of the problem is also the age of the artist at which it happens for. Maybe if it happened younger, they would have more time to implement more changes. But maybe that has, maybe that has something to do with it being implemented at school earlier. But it definitely doesn't reflect or suggest that the quality would be less of the music here. It just, yeah, it just means that, yeah, they could have maybe done the same thing they've done at 27. They could have maybe done it at 18,
Yeah,
19.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and just
Yeah,
develop the music earlier, and
skills.
yeah, exactly. Um,
Absolutely.
but so, I mean, maybe this is a stupid question, but so in terms of music, which music do you see is the most popular in the UAE? Is there a specific one, or is it all kinds?
I would definitely no. I would definitely. It's not a stupid question at all. It's actually a very big. It's actually a very big point of discussion at the moment. To be quite frank with you, in the scene here, I would say that when I joined, or not joined, sorry, I would say that when I re-entered the scene back as a producer in 2015-16, without much doubt, the biggest genres or styles of music would be the metal rock music and like indie acoustic music. There was a very big metal community and a very big indie acoustic community, and I feel over the last 3 years it's completely flipped, and now the metal community is a very small community. The indie acoustic community is also now a much smaller community, and the most popular and prevalent and without doubt biggest genre of music right now would be hip hop and R&B. And I know there are lots of different variations of that genre. There's like neo soul and funk hip hop and lo-fi hip hop and rap and trap, but they all for me fall within that very loose R&B, alternative R&B, hip hop spectrum, and that is without doubt and easily the biggest genre right now. Whether you look at streams, what genres of artists are playing all of the biggest shows, what artists are even visiting and being booked internationally to come play Dubai. They're all rappers, singers, R&B singers, so there's been a very firm and aggressive shift from the more, rock, metal / indie scene to the more electronic hip hop R&B scene, without doubt, in the last 3 years.
Right.
Completely.
Is there any local music scene like that is has a name, perhaps? Is there any like
Sorry,
local
repeat the
music?
question.
Yes. Is there any like local music? I don't know if that's how you call it or not, but that would be
You mean
local
like
to.
Emirati music?
Oh yes, that's the name, I guess.
Yeah, like you mean like local, as in like locals of the UAE, not like residents.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, there is a lot of there is a very big local music scene, but that's predominantly Arabic music. Most of the things, most of the Arabic music scene works very differently to the way it works for English music. And most of the time that I say local, I'm not really implying Emirati. I'm implying more like local residents rather than local nationality. Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense. But do you? So when we talk about local musicians and artists that you work with, is it that basically means from all around the world who has come to Dubai?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So there'll be Arab, there'll be European, African, Asian, from all around the world. I don't even, I don't even think, I even have many from the same country, as each other. So it can go as far as, Africa to Australia, to America. So they're from everywhere,
Cool. And so for you as a producer, do you which music do you get to work on the most? Is it also R&B, soul, hip
Yeah, I
hop?
would say so. Yeah. I mean, I think when I first came here, like I said, it sort of makes more sense why at the time I got into production, most of the people that hit me up and got in touch with me were the rock and metal heads. And now most of the people that hit me up are rappers and singers of like R&B and soul music. So because that genre of music now is probably the most popular, even on a global scale, it probably has a trickle down effect to our scene as well. But it's also one of the most experimental genres at the moment because it's so the lines between those genres now have probably never been so blurred. So because it encapsulates so many different styles of music into one, you would have to say it's probably it's the genre I work with or I get requested the most.
Right. Makes sense. So, I mean, you mentioned also in our previous conversation,
Mm-hmm.
that there's a stigma. I mean, we have touched upon it with venues and all those sort of things, but the music
Mm-hmm.
is not a serious thing quite yet, right? Am I right?
Yes, 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 yes.
So, what would your advice be to break the stigma? Unless beyond venues and that sort of things, is there any other thing
Yeah,
we can do?
I think there's a cultural stigma towards music, and I think this spans the entire region. And I think there are lots of different dynamics that play into this. There's the generation, a change in generation, a change in, you could even say, global politics, a change in awareness, technology. They all play huge parts and they all play huge roles contributing to that stigma. You know what I mean? So I would say that one of the biggest reasons for that stigma is because music is not seen as, like I said, a viable career path. So it's a lot more traditional in this part of the world where it's all based on stability. So what you would have to think, what job and what occupation would be the most stable before you even pursue it. And you would then go back to the most traditional forms of employment, which would be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a teacher, etc. And these are essential parts of the foundation of any community or society. And that's fine. That's absolutely normal. But I think in an age today where we have people that are IT specialists, they are influencers, they are people that do work and have jobs in things that are not tangible. Before, a lot of jobs were tangible. You would have to be a butcher or a baker or a tailor, But today we work with so many invisible services that I don't think the people of this region, in terms of the elder generation having kids, which would be my generation, have adapted to yet. And I think that's why the stigma still exists, because when children and teenagers want to go into it, they will then obviously consult, like I did with my parents, who don't understand that there is this entire new generation and that being an artist is a real thing. And one of the things I always try to tell a lot of people that suffer with this is, there's an expression that says ancient civilizations are never remembered for their lawyers, and such, for their lawyers and businessmen and butchers and tailors. They're remembered by their art.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's how we celebrate civilizations. We celebrate them by their art. We have museums to appreciate their art. And when you think about it that way, it makes you realize that music and the stigma against it is more or less, my advice is to realize that music is a reminder of human expression. That's all. That is your professional title. And it sounds very loose because that's not something you can quantify. Whereas maybe an engineer can fix something and he can quantify what he has fixed and how he has fixed it. But if your job is completely fluid and immersive, and your job is to remind that engineer or remind that doctor or remind that teacher that's been working all day, and they come home or they're with their family or friends, and you want to incentivize them to continue doing what they do every day without feeling demotivated, that's where art and music comes in. And that's where I think the awareness of the job has to be measured and realized by the people with that stigma, that artists and music make change in the hours where other people are maybe not working. You know what I mean? It's a doctor may feel like, people are just numbers after a certain point, or are just cases, or are just folders. But then maybe here's a song about someone who, is talking about losing a loved one, or, remembering a loved one. And then it puts into context and perspective his job, and that all of these people are going through something, and maybe he goes to work the next day re-incentivized. And I think that's where we have to raise the awareness of what music and art is and the value of it.
Yeah, that's very, very well put, man. I like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
That was really good. But I think also, with the work that is still left to be done in Dubai, and with your drive and passion, getting more local artists to play, more venues, etc., that can all be realized, I think. I hope so.
I really hope so. And I hope it's sooner rather than later, because I feel, like I said, we're in the first phase of actually making a change. And then, hopefully, with enough momentum and energy, we can push into the second phase.
Yeah, exactly, man. So, I mean, do you have any plans of ever moving back to the UK or US to also be a producer here?
I've thought about it. I have considered it, as a future plan. But like I said, I always resort and go back to when I first moved here, and I realized how many people didn't believe that music was really something viable here. And I feel maybe I would do myself, a disservice or an injustice to my upbringing and my purpose of why I'm here if I just suddenly moved and decided to do it somewhere else. I sort of feel it's like I have a duty that I'm supposed to uphold, especially after the last 2-3 years of pursuing it. I really feel like it's more that if one of my complaints or one of the things I wished for the most in this music scene was for more determination and perseverance and continued support, it would feel completely unethical and immoral to then suddenly me myself be a departing member. I mean, it's like I said, it's crossed my mind, but I don't think it's something that I feel I can justify yet with what I'm trying to make, with the changes I'm trying to make happen.
Makes sense. Makes all the sense. I mean, so if you could, how do you say it? If you could, have a message to any people who would be reading this in Dubai, that make decisions about music venues and whatnot, what would you say to them if you had a chance?
I would tell them that I would say that to anyone who knows about Dubai, has heard about Dubai, is in Dubai, to understand and appreciate that it may not be, the scene may not be the way we want it, we would love it to be, but the scene can be however we wish it to be. And with change and hard work and perseverance, anything can happen, really. And I feel that if you're someone that's thought about visiting Dubai, then search for people, for music from there. And I'm sure that anyone around the world will find music from this part of the world that they will absolutely love, and they will be surprised at how incredible some of the music is from here and how high quality some of the music is from here. And a lot of the music represents things that anyone around the world is probably experiencing or going through in some way or another, and that that we're here, we're here, and we're trying to make a difference as much as we can.
Yeah. Nice, man. I mean, I think it's really cool what you're doing, to be honest, and I hope it's gonna work out. That you're gonna see a change locally.
Oh, thank you so much, man. That really means a lot, man. I really appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this interview, is because I really feel like part of that catch-22 is sort of what I'm doing here. Maybe it'll give this part of the world a more belief because it's come from outside, and then B, it'll give the outside a bit more, a slightly bigger window into looking into here.
Yeah. Exactly, man.
So yeah, absolutely. No, I really hope so, man. I hope it doesn't go in vain.
No. I don't think so, man. I think you will see some good things happening.
Oh, thank you so much, man. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Rayan, for being on this podcast. It was awesome talking to you, and I hope you, the listener, loved it too. To find out more about Rayan, I have put some links down in the description below, so check those out. And before you leave, I'd love for you to leave a comment and a rating so iTunes can work its magic. And don't forget to download your free guide, 3 tested ways to increase your client base, also in the description below. But yeah, that's it for this week, and I'll see you soon.